Good day and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Journalift webinars. We're very happy to host you here. And as people are joining us, let me say a word or two about the Journalift platform. You can see the domain name behind me. So a very warm advice to all of you to visit this website and to follow all of the social media accounts for all the newest information about the media business development sphere and all the resources that are very interesting and quite significant for the media professionals. Today with us, oh, okay, the number of attendees is rising, so probably as time goes by and a couple of minutes we will have them all. Whoever is joining us, welcome. Today with us, we have quite interesting speakers, and the topic that we're going to cover is a very hot one. We're going to discuss and to try to find a middle solution, try to find the answer to the question: is donor funding viable and a legitimate business model in terms of media organizations? So we will try to cover all of the experiences and all of the case studies from Western Balkans, but also from Hungary. So we have quite interesting speakers joining us today. Journalift platform and this webinar and the entire initiative is being organized within the Media for All project. Thomson Foundation is one of the implementing partners within the project that is being implemented in 6 countries, and we're implementing it together with British Council, Balkan Investigative Report and Reporting Network, and Intrek. So a very big and very warm welcome to all of our colleagues from the project team joining us today. You can ask questions and you can raise comments and ping us all that you need in the chat. So you will not be able to join and to join in the webinar, but kindly use the chat to let us know whatever interests you and whatever questions and comments you may have for our speakers. So joining us today is group of quite interesting people. So we have Tamas Bodoki from Atlazo. I hope that I pronounced it well. So Tamas, welcome today. Tamas is journalist, editor, and nonprofit executive based in Budapest in Hungary. So he has founded, together with his colleagues, he has founded the nonprofit website, which is mainly and mainly focused to investigative journalism. And Atlazo is actually one of the first portals and one of the first outlets is Hungary to utilize crowdfunding in their business model. So we will talk about with Tamas today with his experiences and what is their business model and what's his opinion on this interesting topic. Vitomir Ognjanovic is joining us from Južne Vesti. He is co-founder of Simplicity and Both Južne Vesti, a regional web portal that is covering South Serbia. And he is also an entrepreneur, so he will be also interesting to share his opinions whether this is a viable business model for media outlets or not, because he comes from 2 perspectives and will be able to give us that interesting point of view. Vladimir Trkulja. He is very well known within the Media for All project. So he's an expert for early business development with a long history of working with tech startups. But since recently, actually not recently, 2 years now, he is working with media outlets, both from Serbia, but from North Macedonia and rest of the region too. Vladimir is also included in the stream of additional web business development support within this project. So he has lots to say and lots to share within the scope of media outlets and their experience and their acknowledgement and usage of business development as a concept. And last but not the least, David Quinn is a global media development leader and the managing director for development section of the Thomson Foundation. And he's in charge of sourcing and managing all donor-funded projects within Thomson Foundation. And he also leads the foundation's largest ever project, the European Neighborhood Open Media Hub. He's in the region well known and also knows about the background of it. So happy to have you all here today. And we can start first with Vladimir Trkulja. Please, let's just set the ground for the discussion. So it's very important for us to understand why business model is actually interesting and important as a concept for media industry. So why are we talking about the organizational model? Why are we talking about businesses in terms of media industry? So please give us the intro to that so we can go and continue.
Thank you, Elena, and thank you for the intro. When we speak about business model, it's just important to know that media outlets are basically, in many cases, businesses. And if you run them or if you think about them as businesses, it's very likely that you will ensure that their sustainability and their actually efficient business is something which happens. So if we go by sort of a global definition of a business model, that's something that that describes how an organization or a business creates and delivers the value to its customers, or in this case, all segments of the consumers of the media content and their partners and their supporters and so on. But it also describes how the media outlet or the company is basically containing or keeping some of this value for itself in order to basically pay for the expenses, and also to invest this kind of profit into something which would in the future improve its position or invest into new projects or whatever. So from this perspective, with this question that you initially opened, is project funding and donations a viable business model? I mean, there's like a long answer and there's a short answer, and from my perspective, the short answer is basically no. It's not really like a valid business model. It's not a business, and I would be really happy to discuss on this. But from my experience and from my perspective, really relying on a continuous stream of donations and support from the non-governmental institutions or from the global organizations is basically a way to survive. It's sometimes a bit easier way to survive, or in some cases, sometimes it's only way to survive, but in reality, it should be really like a utility or a tool or a vehicle to support media outlets in order to get on their feet, to really define and build internal capacities, and to develop a sustainable business models, like real business models. So that's something that I'm really trying to well, I would not say evangelize, but to discuss with media outlets in this region. Although this kind of situation in this region, in the whole region, is usually hard, and it's like a really sort of a convenient or comfortable situation to speak about that, when on the field the situation is quite challenging. But in the long run, I don't think that any media outlet is going to do itself a favor by continuously relying on donations and on project funding as the only or the dominant source of income. So that's for the opening.
Good. That's a good opening. And you could not sustain yourself without stating your opinion right at the beginning. I was like, let's do the background, but no, he insisted on that right in the moment. So let's deep dive into that. It's a good opening. Tomasz, I would like to hear your perspective, because on your website there's a donation section still open and still active, and you're actually one of the first ones in Hungary who have introduced crowdfunding as one of the sources. But on the other hand, you are also in receiving a lot of international donors' funds. And as you've stated in your website, 50% of the income that is coming to your media organization is from international donors and from support. So how would you say on the Vlada's point of view? So would you consider that Atlatso actually has a business model, or is it mainly dependent of donor funds? And how would you describe that?
I think in Vlada's view, we don't have a business model, because we only have the crowdfunding and the international donors, and we did not develop other commercial revenue streams. So, but still, Atlatso is 10 years old this year. So we are doing this since 10 years, and this seems to be sustainable on a small scale. So if you don't have a big ambition to grow, then on a small scale for a dozen of journalists, this could actually work. So when I started Atlas, so it was even smaller. We couldn't secure any previous funding. So it started as a one-man show. I was the only journalist in the team, and we decided to go for crowdfunding. And that time in 2011, that was considered to be almost impossible in Hungary to crowdfund media. But as we started to work and started to publish, it turns out that people liked the project and they started to donate small amounts, and we asked for regular small amounts because that makes it more then you can plan ahead what incomes you can expect. So I always emphasize that you need to ask for regular small amounts. It's not good for you if you ask for a big one-time donation, because that is something you cannot calculate with in the future. So we started to do the crowdfunding. We started to, in Hungary, there is a way to collect income tax 1%. If you are a non-profit, you can ask for 1% of the income taxes of the people. And our organization is among the top 30 non-profits to receive this type of support. This also comes directly from the audience. And then we have the international donors, like the Open Society Foundations or Sigrid Rausching Trust or Freetort, who give us core funding or project funding. And the ratio between crowdfunding and big donors is approximately 50%, 50%. But our long-time goal is to make it more to do more crowdfunding and be less dependent on international donors. And in a way, we have an explanation for not having commercial revenues, because when we started this in Hungary, then nobody was doing crowdfunding. And since that time, of course, this is also depends on the political situation, because in Hungary, the government occupied a significant part of the media sector. And so people are looking for independent voices, and people are willing to support financially independent outlets. And therefore, a lot of other outlets started to do crowdfunding as well. But nowadays also we have the paywall coming in Hungary. So more and more outlets are setting up a paywall, and people can access these articles only if they pay. And that is something what is against our philosophy, because we think that our journalism is public service journalism, and the information we dig is important for everyone. And if we set up a paywall and we start charging people to access the content, then this information will be available only for those who can afford it. So we decided not to set up a paywall or premium content business.
That makes sense. And for us to have at least a notion and a reference, how big is your audience? What is the number of the visitors that you have on your website, social media accounts, how that goes? Yeah. And I'm particularly interested to hear how much people is actually paying and supporting you through donations.
I would say it's a couple of 100,000 people in a month. So I would say maybe 500,000 people in a month on the website, and 1 million people on the social media accounts or posts. And approximately less than 1% of the people on the website are willing to pay. So we have approximately 3,000 to 5,000 people who regularly support our journalism, but that is enough to produce this content.
And actually 50-50% as the structure of the funding for now looks really good. So in long term, that actually kind of may bring you on the way that is not making you dependent on project. Thank you very much for the input. Vito, you have quite a similar situation with Južne Vesti. So please, can you give a little bit of a more background about how you're working? What's the structure of the revenue, and what's your opinion? Actually, is it something that you defend on and you keep on having, or you want to go and be more commercialized in future?
Hello, everyone. Well, as Vlada said, the donations are not a business plan, but sometimes are just a way to survive. You cannot do a proper business planning if you have unregulated market, if you have monopoly, if you have administrative, political, or whatever pressures. So they're all factors that has to be involved in any assessment. And in regards of business planning, I would firstly focus on planning, because a lot of media are not planning anything at all. And if you plan the donations, if you plan the projects and everything, you could come to a point where you could do a business planning, or you could do some business development, because you have sort of a resources in people, money, whatever. Before that, if it's a one-man show, if it's a media in a very small city, place, something like that, you cannot expect them to have a business plan, how to sell, I don't know what. So I would focus on planning first. So you say, I want to be there in a year, 2 or 5, and plan the finances accordingly. For example, Južne Vesti would not have a correspondence network in every, let's say, bigger city in South Serbia if there was not some project funding. So we specifically said, okay, we want to do the correspondence network in next couple of years, and we search for a donor that could give us sort of a core support, institutional support, to find, educate, and create those journalist correspondence. And it's a sort of a long-term support. So there is no business reasoning to have them, if we are talking about business strictly. Maybe there is no business reasoning to have media outlets like Južne Vesti or any outlet that do investigative journalism, or that doesn't fall along with the government. But if you choose to do the work that way, you have to, let's say, come to peace of mind that this is your path, and you are trying to change everything around you. As Tamas said, regarding paywalls and stuff like that, our society in general, our citizens are bombarded or pushed with the tabloids and pro-government medias to read bad political PR. And if we want our stories to get the most bigger audience that we can have, so let's say, spread the truth. And if you are asking for people to pay, then the less people will hear the truth. So in terms of numbers, Južne Vesti, let's say, maybe up to 25% is strictly commercial, from advertising, PR, whatever. Maybe around 30-40% are direct donations, let's say, for Južne Vesti. And there are also donations, but donations where we are providing services, because we have an IT department and we have a media outlet, and we can mix those knowledges and people within the company to provide support to other medias, other companies. Sometimes is through some projects. So we are sort of a partners on a program, and we deliver services. So it's a donation, but we are actually providing services for these donations. So in our business, we are seeing that as a business income and not donation income. So if you want to have a media outlet I think in the Balkan, you have to have some sort of a donation, either through crowdfunding if it's possible, if it's administratively manageable for you, for your organization, and ideally long-term donor support, not 6 months or 1 year, maybe target something like a 2, 4, 5 year smaller amounts, but where you can plan for a longer term support.
And also a question to you. So Južne Vesti have also launched Vajdica, the little
Vajdica.
Vajdica. So sorry.
It has to be in an
accent.
accent.
It has to be Vajdica, yeah, the proper accent of South Serbia. So sorry about that. So that is actually a kind of a merchandising support to local designers, actually a product of your own that is bringing revenue too. And that is actually that's actually the project that is funded within the Media for All project. So tell us just a little bit about that. How is that contributing to the overall revenue structure?
Well, it's not strictly focused on a revenue structure. It's mostly focused on a community that we are not yet come to. So there are a lot of people that maybe are not feeling the community, that we are not part of those communities. And this is why we want the local motives on one way to promote the South of Serbia, our designers, our motives, places. And on the other hand, to have people relate to those motives, so we can sort of go in those communities. And some plans for the future are that we actually want to support some local communities in terms of, I don't know, you want a new basketball court or something like that in a school. Okay, let's do shirts that will promote and give part of the revenue to actually renovate or build and stuff like that. So it's more of a long-term planning to get emotional contact within some communities than something that will give I don't know how huge revenue directly, but indirectly, if we go in those communities, our audience will grow, and the audience will tomorrow bring more commercial income.
So we see comments in the chat. The audience are sharing that they love Vajdica and they want to be signed up for a shirt, please. So you have to visit the website to do that. So go ahead and visit our website. And I encourage everybody who is joining us today to give us a comment, to give us a question, write us up in the chat, and we'll make sure to share that with the comments with the speakers and to give feedback on that. Thank you very much for the perspective. So David, you have the experience of working with both media outlets such as Južne Vesti and Atlazo, and with media outlets from all around Europe. What do you think? Do they solely count on project funding as something that will save the ship all the time, or are they being able to look at something that is more commercial and more something like based towards the audience, crowdfunding, and models like that? What will your take be? Is it a business model, or it's something to just save the media outlet for a limited period of time?
Well, first of all, nice to see you all again. Some of you I've met in person. For those that I can't see, participants, hi, nice to join you all. Talking about accents, just a quick apology for those who are not able to interpret Glaswegian Scottish. I will speak very, very slowly. To answer your question, I mean, I've been delivering media development programs for 15, 20 years all over the world. And I would say the general trajectory has always been for grants from the international community to be sticking plasters, in effect, to be sticking plasters specifically tied to development objectives at best or at worst, to be short-term fixes to immediate communications agendas. So even the vague idea that there should be some sense of business rationale attached to media development granting, that's relatively new, and that's relatively new worldwide, is generally and still is met with a considerable body of resistance. To some extent, understandably, met with a body of resistance from both recipients and met with a body of resistance from international development organizations, interlocutors who are uncomfortable with the business of business. But here's the thing. I guess, I mean, much of this conversation is predicated upon two definitions and our understanding of these two definitions, what they are. What's a business? And what's a donation? In the media context, here's a couple of examples for you. I work for Thomson. Thomson was established by Lord Thomson of Fleet in 1963. He famously said, owning a television station was a license to print money, which back then it was, insofar as, certainly in the UK, there were 2 TV stations. So a complete market monopoly. Here's a couple of other illustrations for you as to, from that position to where we are now. I can tell you a major international publication with a market lead position in terms of financial news, who posted a 35 million loss last year. Anyone want to take a guess who that is? Whose owner has some very deep pockets, but still, nonetheless, posted a 35 million pound loss last year. Who do you think that was? No? The FT. Okay, what about the single biggest tabloid newspaper in the United Kingdom? Doing all right? Market dominance? Well-run business? Yeah. Posted a 68 million loss last year. Rupert Murdoch's The Sun. So if the FT and The Sun are not really very successful businesses, and I can hear already people saying, yes, The Sun had to write down a considerable amount of money last year in one-off costs due to phone hacking, and the year before that too, true, but they would still have posted a loss. What do we mean by a media business in the context of anywhere else? And the simple answer to that is, we mean many and various things. What we don't necessarily mean is a mirror to some other set, predetermined set of values as to what a media business should be from very old media markets who are dysfunctional, if not in many ways more dysfunctional, or as dysfunctional in their own way. That certainly is not what we mean. In the context of the Western Balkans, I'd suggest, and indeed many other places too, Central Europe as well, what's a media business? A media business, a successful media business, is one that is wiping its face. It's one that is covering its core costs. That's a pretty good place to start. Covering its core costs from a mixed economy. which leads us to the second definition. What's a donation? In the context of this conversation, generally the implication is a donation being let's start from the place where we're saying it's the international community making a donation. How successful, how useful, how valuable in terms of stimulating mixed economies are those donations? Answer: it depends if they're tied specifically to long-term business modeling, audience research, a valuable insight into multiple revenue streams that may or may not have direct implications upon the editorial structure, exactly as we've just been hearing from June Zaviesti, which is one of the reasons why we at Thomson are big fans, as you know. And specifically, I guess the question here is, and Tamas made a very good point here about small and frequent. The predictability, as well as the innovation capacity tied to those donations, matters a lot. Up to now, we have often seen, particularly for the Western Balkans, but also elsewhere, large donations made, large grants given, whose implications from a business management point of view are horrendous, insofar as they take an awful long time to manage, they're very, very difficult to digest and process, and they may or may not have anything to do really with long-term innovation and research. And there's a final sort of parallel here. 2019, The Guardian posted its first profit since 1998. Granted, COVID's been a bit difficult, but it's been a bit difficult for everyone. You're looking at an organization now that has 2/3 of its readers outside of its core market. It has invested considerable sums in research, audience research into various English language audiences. Put in context for the Western Balkans, similar research objectives from donations would be very useful, i.e., let's look at the Serbian diaspora, let's look at the Albanian diaspora, let's look at other audience possibilities with that innovation granting. Final point on that would be, then again, Google News Initiative's 100,000, I think it was dollar grant to then again. Now, you can have a view in terms of the source of that financing, in terms of big tech and its granting of money to institutions that in some senses it has landscapes, environments, media landscapes that it itself is damaged. That's a separate conversation for another time. But that 100,000 was used immediately by Denning N to do deep dive audience research on subscription exclusively. Nothing else, no core financing, nothing, just that money, which subsequently was a pretty solid investment, I would contend, given where they are in the market. That's the landscape stuff, I suppose, from my point of view.
Thank you very much. And you mentioned innovation and actually business models and the syntagm of business models in the donor community being a new thing. So question to all of the speakers, so you can raise your hand or just join in the communication however you like it. Isn't that a hard thing? And isn't that a hard investment? Because the donors are being led by their states. They have their own agendas, which is a legitimate way of financing in terms of research, development, and innovations. But looking at it from the perspective of a media outlet, when that income is actually on your business account and you have money to use it, you have to use it according to a predefined timeline. You have to use it to implement the activities that are preset. You have to work on the goals that actually donor is asking you to work on them, taking into account all the good things that may and should come from it. But isn't that a limiting sector? That is not an innovation, that is a kind of or may be looked as something that is an investment that is very much conditioned. So you're not able to use the money as you want. You're not able to use the money for research, for investment. You have to use it, 15% has to be for the salaries, 20% has to be for promotion, 10% has to be for travel. And if you go beyond that, you're in a very big trouble. So how does that goes in terms of looking at for the perspective of media outlets? If we are looking at that as an investment, as a revenue and as income, it's a quite hard one. David, you have raised your hand. Go ahead.
I think the answer to that, to some extent, is it's, well, from our point of view, from Thomson's point of view, that has been about representing the innovation to be found in the media landscape in the Western Balkans, for example, to the donor, and essentially spending a lot of time in advocacy saying you can't structure your granting programming in this way. You have to structure it around the fact that you've actually got quite a solid, innovative media landscape in many ways, with lots of different issues attached to it. But if you want to do just core financing grants, that's fine. Here's the outlets that you can do that with. If you want to do something that has a greater degree of independent stability attached to it, and therefore moving away from a kind of public interest media support type programming, then you're going to have a bit more flexibility as to how they use it, particularly in terms of audience research.
You rarely have that flexibility. Vladimir, go ahead.
Thanks. I would really make a difference between like personal donations, which we have mentioned a lot, and which are in reality quite viable, actually a business model for local media outlets, and which give you a lot of space to innovate and to use those people and those resources to advance your basically media business. So there's a huge difference between somebody taking a certain portion of money from their mouth and giving it to you as a media outlet to use for whatever you would like to use it, and between a money which is given by a large international organization saying, here's some money for one very specific thing, which you need really to spend on this very specific thing. So the first option, like individual donors, that's a lot of, there's a lot of potential to utilize them, to offer them subscriptions, to upsell to them some of the things, to convert them to some sort of official supporters, or just to continue having them as donors, or to hire people who would, just remind them from time to time that it would be really great to donate. I mean, there are international organizations who are built on this kind of model, and it works actually. So I think that those two things are very different. And in that sense, I would say that Tamás has quite a nice revenue, like 50%, from people who actually support and stand behind what he and his team are doing. So that's huge, that really matters much more than, having some sort of international organization coming to your country and saying, okay, we want to give you a bunch of money, but only once, and you can only use it for this, and you basically need to deliver that, and that's it. So that's really like a huge difference.
Thank you very much. Tamás, your comment about Vlada's answer and to the question, or if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that there is a difference even in international donors. It might be project funding or might be core funding. And project funding is indeed very difficult, because then you have to agree beforehand on a certain project and stick to that project and administrate everything. And also a lot of international donors insist on a cross-border project. So in our case, we have to find someone in another country, a similar organization, or journalists in other countries, and do cross-border research, while our core business is country-specific, it's domestic investigative journalism. So project funding can be very difficult and even can derail your organization, because if you start to go for the projects, you will find yourself doing completely different things than you intended or originally intended. At the same time, the core funding means that you are doing your thing, and the donor thinks that it is important and it is worth to support, and they do not attach any strings to their donation. You can use it freely. So we prefer core funding over project funding, but we also prefer crowdfunding over both type of institutional funding, because crowdfunding also it is also does not attach strings. You can plan if you have thousands of regular donors, you can start to plan on the income in the future. And also it means legitimacy, and it is very important, especially in a country like Hungary, where international donors are labeled as foreign agents, and organizations who receive the money from international donors are labeled unpatriotic and treacherous, and so that comes with a label. So while crowdfunding, the domestic audience, your audience, comes with legitimacy, because then you can show to the people and also to the government that we do have local support, and thousands of local citizens are supporting our cause, and that gives you an edge over non-profits which are dependent on international grant making.
Thank you very much, Tomasz. So can we say, what's your stand in with this particular question? Would you say that project funding is actually not a viable and not a sustainable business model, but something that can help you in the beginning and then bring you towards your audience? Would you agree or disagree with this?
I would partly agree, partly disagree, because we still do projects as well. But you have to select the best projects which are in line with your mission and in line with your goals. And the problem is when you start to get all the projects just to make some money. That's not okay, and that's not viable. But if you carefully select projects which are in line with your mission, that's fine in my opinion. Of course, that has to be a certain percent of your budget. So I would not recommend anyone being 100% project funded. That would be very difficult.
Thank you. Thank you very much. David has raised his hand, and then we go to Vitomir.
Yeah, I mean, that comes back to the question, I suppose, of what do we mean as a donation? Looking at things from the position of getting a sensible mix of crowdsourced financing and subscription financing, and to some degree, a percentage of international donor financing from more established bodies is by far and away, I mean, from our point of view, the sensible mix. But it has to be done ideally, just as Tomasz is pointing out, from a position of what is the most legitimate place for you as a media organization within your landscape? What does it mean for you to pursue a subscription-based model alone? What does it mean for you to pursue a crowd or go more strongly in a crowdsourcing direction? And what does that then subsequently mean if you're going to take any international donor financing as well? And to bring this back to a point made earlier, that there are, of course, as Vladimir pointed out, there are, of course, differences in donor positions. Some, from a philanthropic point of view, do take a more flexible approach. Some do take an approach that is driven much more by audience research and stimulating market performance in that way. And some are more orientated around more slower moving, shall we say, traditional aspects of public policy. And it's getting, I guess the point here would be, It's getting a clear position yourself as an organization on what that ideal mix looks like before then speaking to particularly the international, more established international government donor positions, establishing what you want from that mix, and then having that conversation, because some are not right. Some will not be right. Some will not fit within the kind of innovation landscape that you want to pursue.
So would you agree or disagree that focusing only on project funding is a viable business model or not?
No, I don't think it's a viable business model. In the context of the Western Balkans, I'd go further than that. I'd say not only is it not a viable business model, but I'd say it's for many, it's an unnecessary business model. For some, it might be necessary because that is the trajectory they set out on 20 years ago or 15 years ago, and they're too far down that road, and effectively, therefore, are internationally supported public service broadcaster or public service mission-orientated institution. And that's fine. That's, as a part of a media ecosystem, that's fine, but it cannot be the single dominant bit of the media ecosystem. And still within the Western Balkans, despite the difficulties, many in various, and I just saw a comment there from one of the participants from Albania pointing out the difficulties in terms of digital legislation in the Albanian landscape. No one's pretending that there aren't difficulties, but at the same time, one thing that we certainly would not forget is the amount of business savvy innovation that exists within the region and the amount of potential that exists as a consequence of that knowledge.
Yeah, just to point out to other attendees. So there was a comment in the chat. Adriati Golemai from Albania is actually addressing the situation which is happening in Albania, but all across Western Balkans and of course in Hungary and even wider, having state being influencing media industry all across the board, as in the ownership structure, as also pumping in the money through advertising and through all sorts of influence that go even beyond and that are threatening both the well-being and the sustainability of the media outlets. So that is also the background in which we're operating. Looking especially to that particular context, Vito, you guys in Južne Vesti, you know what it's like to be in that battle every day. How would you describe the model as a viable or a non-viable? And would you think it is something that is that is going to be existing in Serbia and in Western Balkans still? And media outlets receiving the funds, would they be able to survive or not? Because as David has mentioned, there's a lot of difficulties in introducing new revenue streams because our markets are not quite accustomed to paying for content. So paywalls are not that popular in all across the Western Balkans. How would you look into that?
Well, I would like to firstly address, like Vlada said, donations could be a viable business model, but you have to take the culture and the market itself. I personally have insights in several medias, organizations that are trying or doing crowdfunding donations, and believe me, we are talking far, far, far less from 50% of the revenue that is covered through donation and crowdfunding. So you have to measure how much administrative burden is actually doing everything that relates to donations in terms of GDPR, privacy protection, and stuff like that. So actually, somebody from government could target your supporters quite easily. So I don't think here that could be a business model. It could be, let's say, small revenue stream and something that will give your journalists a bit of hope and sort of a support. There are people that are actually willing to support the hard work they do. Like in any business, you have to avoid situations like a single point of failure. So when you're doing business, you are trying not to do it just for one client. You are trying to have several clients from usually different countries, maybe different industries. So when there is a crisis in one industry, your revenue streams could be left independent. So you could move around between your revenues. Okay, you will have a, let's say, a little setback and stuff like that, but you will not fall apart. So in terms of donations, projects, whatever, you have to align that with your plans and market where you're working. So if we're talking about project funding, you don't have to necessarily apply for all projects, any projects. You should try to find the projects that are in line with something that you would like to do. Expand, learn, educate, build, invest, wherever. So you should pick the projects that is aligned with your let's say business, with your work. And the problem here is that there is no core support. So the organizations are applying for all types of projects because they need money, actually, and they try to move money around and throughout the project to leave some expenses covered, to have some core expenses actually covered with a project. So they put, I don't know, 2 journalists to do whatever they do just to cover their salaries. So we actually need core support for medias, especially the small ones, to survive, so they could build some other revenue stream in the future. A lot of donors expected that after 10, 15, 20 years, the media will not be in position like we are now. And a lot of the programs are actually built 10, 15 years ago, hoping that the situation for media will be much better. So we could do a business development. We could do some, I don't know, interesting investments of some interesting things. But actually the situation is maybe even worse than it was 20 years ago. So we need core support if we want a lot of those small medias to survive. And then we can talk about everything else, businesses, planning and whatever. But at this point, I think the small medias just need core support so they could feel financially unthreatened. That's
So would you say, feel free to agree or disagree, that maybe your outcome and maybe your thought would be that project fundings as something that starts you up and that puts you on your feet and then leaves you to pursue other revenue streams is a viable business model or not? Viable model of functioning for media industry or not?
I mean, if it's a part of a plan of a longer term planning, it is part of a business. I mean, if you want to build a, I don't know, mobile app that costs 15, 20,000 euros, but in the future will bring you different revenues, different communities, different, I don't know, possibilities, then why not? If there is a project that will cover that, why not? I don't see any issue within that. But you have to plan that and not, you know, oh, there is a project that has a mobile app, let's do mobile app for 20,000. You know, the essence is that nobody plans anything. And this is why we have the projects as a part of a business model. Project funding could be if it's planned, like look at like investments, like, you know, you need some amount of money to get to a next point in your development or whatever. And this is where the project funding could be fun and useful. But if you are searching for projects to cover your core expenses, I'm not sure it's a way to do things.
Thank you, thank you. And we also have our participants in the chat stating at regions like Africa, so donor philanthropy funded news organizations and newsrooms actually had that as an only way of support. So there wouldn't be independent news and independent media outlets in particular regions without donor support. So that is also acknowledged. David, you've raised your hand. So because we have 4 minutes to 5, David will have to leave us, but we can continue chatting for 5 to 10 minutes. And I'm very much motivating everybody who are listening and watching us to leave the comments and questions in the chat, and we will make sure to address them. David, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. There are some independent media outlets who, you know, need to exist, should exist, and will only ever exist with international domestic public interest finance models. That's a given. But nonetheless, a healthy media landscape is one that has a mixed economy around it. And that fundamental point that Vitamin's talking about not just looking at any donor support as being from an opportunistic position, no matter how understandable that might be. I mean, I'm minded to look at, I'm always fond of bringing in sort of football metaphors to things. My mind tends to go that way. Look at the state of Manchester United, a squad that has been assembled full of players completely opportunistically that don't actually seem to, you know, ultimately speak to a bigger plan. They are in effect, each and every one of them, a kind of, here comes an international donor finance program. Some of that may be for independent investigations. Some of it might be driven towards environmental coverage. Some of it might have an objective towards gender equality, so on and so forth. But none of it necessarily for your business hangs together as a core proposition for you, in which case, don't pick it up. If you can shape it to a more coherent objective as an investment, as many other contributions are, for example, you know, when there have been tax breaks or structural dynamics that you can lean into that will benefit your business indirectly, take that opportunity. Easier said than done, granted, but nonetheless, the possibility is there to do that. And the advice is there, particularly in the region. I mean, people like, you know, Smart Octo and Tech EU, FEFA, the Independent Journalists Association of Vojvodina, and many others. That knowledge base, Vladimir being a very good example, of course, too, that knowledge base exists in the region, in the Western Balkans, in a way that is actually probably denser and more of it and more experienced than in many other regions.
True that, true that. Media for All project is actually the illustration of it. So it's not perfect, but it's getting there. So hopefully it serves as a support.
You picked up on my lead, Yelena.
Thank you, thank you. We also have a question in the chat for Tamas. So there's a question of what kind of content do they produce, and what type of content resonates only to the audience and to the donors. And Tamas will also pick up from that, and I will also kindly ask all of our speakers to give us a sentence of a wrap-up or advice or two towards the media outlets who are planning to apply for another project or planning to consider some business development stream, so we can wrap it up and not and be mindful of the time. So Tamas, over to you, and then we can continue with all the speakers to wrap up the conversation. In case we finish and you had a question or comment to ask, please write us on Twitter, on our social media accounts. We have Instagram and Facebook, so use journalift.org to reach us out so we can continue the discussion. So Tamas, over to you, and then to the others. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we produce investigative journalism, we produce stories, we produce camera drone videos. Basically, our core business is following public spending to watchdog how the state is spending the taxpayers' money. And this is popular because the mainstream media, especially government-controlled mainstream media, is not doing this at all. So paradoxically, if you live in a country where the government is bullying the media and is controlling the media, then and you are an independent outlet, you have good chances to build to build up revenue streams from the audience, because people can see that you are publishing stuff that the mainstream media or government controlled media does not, and that therefore they will support you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do you have a final thought to wrap this discussion up? So any advice for the people who are applying for the projects or considering to introduce some revenue streams? How can they start and reach out the 50% of the audience support that you're actually having now?
Well, my main advice would be that first start and do something and put it out on the internet to others to see, and then go for the money, because a lot of projects first want to get a lot of money and then we will start, and often this does not work out.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Vlada, final advice, final thought on the question that we have, and any advice that you can have both as a mentor within this project and as an entrepreneur.
Well, I would just, like suggest to people who are basically journalists and who are usually owning the media outlets and who are running those things, like just to look back, if you're doing the same thing and struggling for, like how many years, and you're actually not making any considerable improvement in your business, like you're not opening new revenue streams, you're not improving your personal life, basically, it's a good question to really like think about what and how you're doing it, because like at some point people tend to do that when they are young. And you can do that in your 20s, like you can push hard, you don't have family to feed, you don't have other things to do. But this kind of approach of not progressing or not putting your media business or your media outlet on a stable feet is usually going to hit you at some point. And at that point, you're going to be very prone to basically, like to somebody who is coming with a bag of money who wants to throw it your way. I'm not saying that it will always happen, but I think that media outlets who tend to or who want to stay independent actually need to be financially independent, however that hard is going to be. But that's the only way to ensure that you are basically true to yourself, and that you can continue doing what you actually like and what you believe into through different phases of your life and your company's or your media outlet's life. So that's something that I would like to wrap it up with.
Thank you very much. One of the comments in the chat is that actually truth-telling media financing is blocked in so many ways that leaves these media outlets with no other options but to quote unquote beg for donors to join in the dark and to support. So David, any final comment about this and any advice both to media outlets and participants in this chat or the others that are listening and watching this?
I think in many ways, a lot of this boils down to knowing what is going to attract and continue to attract an audience, and having a very clear market position yourself, no matter what the difficulties are, but having a clear market position yourself and knowing as much as is humanly possible about that audience in the first instance matters. The second part of that then is communicating that market reality back the way to those potential international donors, telling them through organizations like Thomson, amongst others, that a flexible granting approach that would facilitate deepening audience research, a better way of looking at multiple revenue streams such as they're available, and in combination, core financing. Looking at that in combination and having that conversation back to the international donor community and the philanthropic community as well, both individuals and institutions, as a coalition, not just as one organization, not just as one newsroom, but as many newsrooms, particularly across the Western Balkan region. Speaking with that one voice matters. So that would be generally my advice, but starting from the position of knowing your audience's interests very well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Vito, final comments and advice from your side.
Well, my advice would be start planning from short-term to long-term planning, and be sure that your plan involves everything that comes to your mind in terms of revenue streams, nevertheless, projects, donations, crowdfunding, whatever, and just evaluate them and put them in some sort of a timeline. And you need to do a research, probably first within yourself and your organization, and to get to know your community or your audience better, so you could, while planning, do a sort of a backlog checking if you are in line with what you want to do, where you want to be, and does your audience is something that will support in any term those plans that you have.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So with these final comments, we have close to the ending of our discussion. This is a topic that actually draws so many questions and so many sub-questions that we can talk for hours, but we have to stop somewhere. So the recording of this debate will be available on journalib.org, which is actually the organization that I've mentioned. So thank you for pinpointing into asking that. So please visit journalib.org for all the resources and for the wrap-ups of this discussion and for the very useful resources for the media industry, both in the Western Balkans, but also globally. And follow us on social media, so you will receive notions about new webinars and new discussions, and also some lessons learned from this one. And also have in mind what we've been talking here today, and write us a tweet, email, whatever is actually pressing your particular media outlet and your industry. And we as speakers and here as experts, people participating here will be more than welcome and more than happy to pursue and continue the discussion. With that said, thank you everyone for joining us, and we will talk soon with a new and interesting topic on next time. Bye bye everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.